Hi guys, thanks for tuning in. I just watched the debate between V and Millennial Woes on Millennial Woes channel. Millennial61, I believe. I'll link the video below in the comment section if you want to have a listen to it. It's 2 hours and 22 minutes long, and it's very painful. But I think there was so many errors made by V, and so much just dismissive arrogance that I kind of raged in the comments below in the video a little, and I decided I'd just highlight a few issues and make a bit of a quick podcast, not really video, about it. So I'll play you some segments of the video, and then I'll give you some commentary on it or some of my thoughts. So, I mean, generally, Millennial Woes and V were going on a lot about sort of the differences between the skeptic community and, the alt-right, essentially. And I have to say, I mean, you really see, V lives in Romania, as far as I understand. He's a medical student, I believe, there in Romania, who's just sort of ended his studies to just be a YouTube personality. And I mean, you just see straight away that people who don't live in London, people who don't live in Paris, people who don't live in Brussels and Malmo in Rotterdam, they just don't get it. I mean, if you're in Bucharest or in some, small town in Romania, well, of course you think there's no big problem with the migrants. I mean, as far as I understand, Romania is also a little bit too far east to really be affected by much of the migrant stream. Even the Balkan route, I guess, would have primarily passed through Serbia, Croatia, and Hungary and Austria. So you get a lot of these just airy-fairy kind of liberal, ideological comments that just devoid of real-world context. I mean, I don't know if he's visited London, but I suggest he visits Malmo, visits Luton, visits Brussels, and just has a look around and gets a bit of an impression what it's like really to live in these kind of societies, and then goes back to Romania and compares the general feel to a mono-ethnic society. So anyway, I've got a few issues I want to play. Is the first thing that I thought sort of interesting, and I think this is a mistake that pro-capitalists make, is this idea that diversity, is required for corporate advantage. We need to be able to hire people regardless of race, because otherwise we miss out on the the best talent in the world. And I'll just play you that segment now quickly between Millennial Woes and V. Bear with me here if I have to kind of scrub a little bit through the audio.
Capitalist society, you can't afford not to hire people that are based on merit. If you're just going to hire people based on race or ethnicity, you're going to pass over really skilled talent who's just going to work for the competition. So the invisible hand of the market is going to fix that shit.
The invisible hand of the market is going to fix that shit. Right. Okay. So there's so much in that. First, let's look at the real world and not, some kind of Rothbardian, airy-fairy theory here. Which countries are doing well in economic struggles, basically, on the planet? Well, that would be China, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan. These are the countries that are growing. These are the countries that are developing. And look, I'll leave Japan aside a little bit because, yes, they have some economic problems. But by and large, Japan still today is a major trading power, major super advanced country. and obviously China and South Korea and Taiwan and Vietnam and all these other countries are growing rapidly, right? They're all monoethnic. Are they desperately trying to attract talent from all ethnicities in the world so that they can develop? No. I mean, how have they managed to basically relocate all of the West's manufacturing and a lot of the R&D, any of the car, most of the car manufacturing, most of the electronics manufacturing, most high-speed rail network construction and manufacturing. I mean, basically all major economic development, really. How is that possible in these monoethnic nations if they can't attract diverse talent? Right? I mean, that just shows you that that argument is nonsense. But even within the United States, within Western countries, I mean, look, American car companies hired a lot of diverse talent in Detroit. They had a lot of blacks working for them. They probably had a lot of Hispanics working for them. How's that working out for those American car companies? I don't think it's working out that greatly, you know. Uh, and more importantly, I mean, this idea that capitalism forces people to hire diverse talent, I don't think that's actually the motivation. I don't think that's actually the reasoning. I think really wealthy elites do a lot of things that are not efficient. People in large corporations have ideological reasons. They already have all the money in the world. They now are looking for things to do with that money, right? With their position of power that go beyond just profit. I mean, good examples of this are, for example, Elon Musk. I mean, his driving ideology is not profit. He has a much bigger goal, like a ideological goal of settling, Mars and of making humanity a spacefaring civilization, of enabling cars to be electric, of kind of fixing global warming or whatever his fears are with electric cars. I mean, he didn't start those companies purely because he thought they were going to be profitable. As a matter of fact, they are not profitable. They are highly subsidized by the state. And the same goes for, people like Jeff Bezos, who's also in the whole in on the whole space thing, and who hasn't, Amazon doesn't make any profits really hardly. So, I mean, and if you look at a lot of the mixed race advertising out there, that often turns consumers off. I mean, I think we see this now with cinema, right, where you have viewership numbers just going down when there's this sort of forced diversity in movies like Star Wars. I mean, I think the box office on the latest Star Wars is about 25% down compared to the previous one. And that's, probably also because it's a bad movie. But I think partly the reason it's a bad movie is because they're trying to push all these sort of SJW narratives in it, all these diversity narratives. So they're clearly not concerned with the product. So, I think this is a very superficial point to make, that, capitalism requires diversity because the best talent may be of a different race. In some cases, that might be true. But do we want to transform our societies into this atomized free-for-all of competition between all humans on the planet, just because some corporation might get a slight skills advantage in some cases? I think that's a very bad argument. But I'll continue now with some other issues here that kind of pissed me off. I think the next one is V going on about Mudik. I think that's at around 51 minutes. I'll try to find that. And I'll play that for you, yeah. So I'll just start that for you now.
I think that race mixing should be discouraged for many reasons. Do you want me to list those reasons?
Well, all right. So no, because at the end of the day, it's the principle, right? You're not really far to the right, in my opinion. You are what I would call a pious activist. It would be like
What?
the opposite of a social justice activist, where you want to use the pressure of society in order to
And
force
so do
individuals
you.
into a certain direction. No, I just
No,
said
I want
I
to
don't think
push
people.
individuals in a certain
Yeah,
direction, and so do you.
well, people who watch you, I don't think are bad people, and I wouldn't force them to stop watching you. For instance, you're a piously correct activist in the way of, if someone marries, let's say, a black woman, there should be major social pressure and social shame upon that person, right?
There is.
Yes.
Okay, I don't believe that's the case. This is why we differ,
Well,
right?
here's the thing. Here's the thing. Other ethnic groups have that attitude, and that means that if we don't have that attitude, then we are going to be, well, replaced by them ultimately. This is something that you can't, and you can just drop out of it and say I don't care, but then you are betraying your people,
You're
your
trying to force
ancestors,
me.
and
Okay, so, right.
All right. That's enough of that. He goes on to make the claim that he might be a very good father to a mixed race kid because even though there is statistics showing that mixed kids, especially between very divergent races, do have more mental health problems, do have identity issues, and those families divorce more often. But yeah, just to address some of what's been going on here, right? So these basically saying that we should allow, or we should not have any kind of social pressure on people who race mix. In other words, it doesn't matter who you marry, who you love, who you have a relationship with, who you have kids with. I think this is a total mischaracterization of the issue, and it is also in a way a communist way of looking at the issue. In a way, V here is the social justice warrior, because you have to remember people just naturally do have that reaction, right? You have to force people, you have to indoctrinate people to not have that reaction. I mean, people naturally just look like. When you look at when the average person on the street, who's not even alt-right, when he sees a beautiful white blonde woman and a black man, and then the woman has a mulatto child, and they're just walking down the street, I would argue not just alt-right people have a revulsion to that. This is a natural human reaction. I believe this is it may have evolutionary reasons. Sure, maybe some of it is also cultural, but some of it's just simply, especially if it's a guy, a white guy, I mean, there's probably some jealousy involved there as well. But this idea that there's not going to be any social repercussions for that kind of behavior, I mean, that means you've actually got to put restrictions on the social repercussions, right? Because they're going to happen anyway. So that's problem number one. Number two, if we look at the statistics, if we look at the actual reality of mixed race couples and families, I think we are seeing the results of diversity, right? So first of all, if you live in a monoethnic country, it just doesn't happen, right? I mean, Japanese women, by and large, marry Japanese men, right? Korean women, by and large, marry Korean men. And you have very few mixed race couples in those societies, in China as well. So it's kind of putting the carriage before the horse here, right? To say, well, we just have to allow it. Yeah, well, but first you have to actually create that diverse society for that to even happen in the first place, right? So you're actually kind of V's kind of shifting the goalposts here a bit. But if we actually look at how those relationships turn out, I think there's plenty of evidence that they don't turn out that well on average. So advocating for that, and like the actual social, the sort of grandma that tells you, don't marry a black, Well, she's not doing that because she's some old hag who is totally, racist and bigot and xenophobic. I don't believe that. I believe that her way of thinking took into account ancestry. It took into account genetic lineage. It took into account family. And it took into account a society where it's important what your grandchildren are going to do and what your great-grandchildren are going to do and who they are, right? So the problem we're having here is that V is just completely atomized, and he doesn't understand that race mixing is not just an issue between the man and the woman having sex. It affects the family at large, and that's why other people in your family will be against it, and other people in your enlarged family will also, your larger tribe will also be against it. Now, what are those things that are negative? Well, for one, the child, you cannot control the genetic blending in any way, right? So we know that the child could look more white, more Asian, more black, more Arab. You don't know exactly. You can also not control it between the individual children you have. So you might have a kid that looks very black, and you might have another kid that looks very white. There's just luck of the game, right? These kids, depending on where they grow up, are going to be treated differently in school. Like this idea that kids are, all sort of on board with the social justice warrior kind of dogma from day one is just not true. In kindergarten, in primary school, kids are mean, and you are increasing the chance that your kids are going to be subjected to that kind of meanness. I had some other points here I've written down. Right. Then, more importantly, as we, are going into the future, we are going to, I think economically, we are entering the Asian century, right? Or maybe the Asian millennium, right? And so this idea that these ideas of diversity and tolerance and equality and race blindness are going to continue into the future are very naive as well. As the West loses economic clout and Asia rises, the ideas of like Asian ideas are going to become more important. And the Asians, they're totally xenophobic, and they totally laugh about half Asian kids. I mean, you're basically cutting off your child from the mother or the father's culture, really, because it's really only white societies that currently allow or give mixed race kids any kind of tolerance. I lived in Asia for quite a while, and in Japan, for example, these kids are called hahus, and they're terribly mistreated, right? And their entire childhood, their entire time growing up, is filled with this dread of not fitting in and not being able to identify with their friends, and maybe the parents of their friends kind of telling them not to play with them. I mean, this is reality, right? It doesn't matter how much social justice warriors want to tell you that we have to all be indoctrinated, not behave like that. What do you actually want your kid to experience? Do you want it to have a experience of fitting in, of having friends it can get along with, that think like him or her? Or do you want it to have an isolated, atomized, outcast existence in childhood? I mean, these are important questions you should ask yourself when you become a parent. And more importantly, what if that kid grows up to hate you? What if the kid says, oh, white privilege, I'm Asian, I'm black, fuck you, whitey. There's a good chance that kid will be indoctrinated to think like that if they're mixed race. So, I mean, it's just a disaster waiting to happen, right? And you don't have to be racist, or you don't have to actually even care about your society at large to not want to do that. You can be entirely selfish and only care about yourself and your family and still see the downsides of race mixing. So that's what I wanted to say about that. Then there's another segment where, basically V goes on and says, well, stripping people of citizenship is totalitarian. And I'll just play that. So that's at about 109, I believe. Yeah, about here. So have a listen to this.
Get the strings and, use the government for their benefit.
Well, that's what they have now. Yeah, but that's what they have right now.
And they chimped out. Yeah, they chimped out when Trump won the election. And they were like, oh my God, they're not going to get access to the drone strikes and they're going to get access to the NSA. Holy shit. It's like, well, yeah, but Obama created it. Look what you did. You're fucking happy? And you gave the state so much power. And now someone else got in charge. Congratulations, you idiots.
It sounds like, yes, I understand. I understand the point you're making. I think that you are really obsessed with the state having power over people in general and you as an individual, and you think it. Your feeling is always that it will go wrong, it will be bad, and it's just ugly.
My parents grew up from this, right? You understand? My parents grew up.
Yeah, I know. Yes, I can see why you would run from it. I really understand that. I'm not talking about implementing a communist dictatorship or whatever, a fascist dictatorship. I'm talking about encouraging ethnocentrism in people so that they start to care far more than they do today.
I understand what you're doing, right? But you can't have a state that takes away its citizens' right. Like this is the core rights you're talking about, right? If a person is not a citizen, he's going to have significantly lesser rights than any other person in that country, right? So the state just did a grave injustice to him. You can't do this without having a totalitarian government.
All right. You can't do this without having a totalitarian government. Well, who says we don't have totalitarian governments now? Let's look at the reality of what's going on in Europe and the United States, right? The grave injustice right now is being done to the citizens of the countries, right? They are being replaced. They are being outnumbered. Their wages are being suppressed, and they're being forcibly presented and mixed up with people from all around the world who didn't live there, and who these citizens don't want to have living next to them, right? So it's funny how the totalitarianism is only ever invoked when it's against the colored people, right? When it's against the white people, well, that's not totalitarianism. We can treat them however we want. We can make laws that they're not allowed to be on their own companies as board of directors anymore. We can make laws that they, have to take a back seat when entering universities with affirmative action. We can make laws that, we can have the BBC, for example, the main broadcaster in the United Kingdom's consistently refuse to hire them and even put this in the ads. But when the same happens with colored people, you can't do that, right? I mean, what people have to understand is that whites don't get those same rights in the third world in return, right? You have colored people coming into the United Kingdom, and suddenly they get all these advantages, like being preferably hired at the BBC and many other corporations. The white person can't go to China, can't go to Africa and get the same rights in return. Right? It's not a two-way street. So we're already talking about a form of totalitarianism here. But more importantly, this idea that people can never be stripped of their citizenship without a full-on totalitarian dictatorship. I mean, look, this is just historically incorrect. Shit like that will just happen when ethnic strife gets bad enough, no matter what the government wants, no matter who plans what. And just look at Yugoslavia, right? I mean, are we going to call the Croatian and the Slovenian and the Bosnian governments all fascist totalitarian dictatorships? No. But still, ethnic sorting and ethnic cleansing happened, right? And this was not all the Serbs' fault. I mean, this is just propaganda by the United States. So this shit happens naturally, okay? You don't need some kind of... But really what's happening in the West now is that diversity, immigration is unnaturally being supported, right? I mean, these citizenships that, these citizens of the West, these colored citizens, black citizens that V is talking about, well, who gave them the citizenship in the first place? Are we to say that when a government makes a mistake, when a government has bad policies in the past, these can never be revoked? I mean, this is absurd. Yeah, so, I find a lot of his argumentation is sort of like the argumentation of social justice warriors, just without, without the overt YT bashing. It's more implicit, right? And maybe it's just because he doesn't understand the situation because he lives in Romania, but I don't know. Anyway, I don't want to go on too long about this video because it was already painful enough to to watch it. But I do want to close it with the most awesome, few moments in the entire clip, in the entire 2.5 hours, and I'll just play those for you now. They were pretty damn funny. Yeah, starting here.
And certainly Islam sees it as a racial and religious competition.
No, Islam
either way,
hold on, you're wrong.
You're wrong.
Either way, secular whites are going to get fucked.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, secular whites would be the communists and the Antifa as well. So
I'm a secular
I don't know if they're getting fucked because they do seem to be in quite a lot of positions of power. Like if you look at many CEOs in Facebook, Google, you do have
Jews,
white people that are
or Indian.
basically secular.
No.
But what I wanted to say is that Islam doesn't view itself as a race. In fact, it's the opposite. Islam does view itself.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, I understand. It wants to conquer the whole world. I know all that.
Yeah,
but from our point of view, that is irrelevant.
But in Islam, they don't view.
Point. Shut up. Shut up.
You're wrong.
Let me finish a point. No, okay. I'm not wrong. You are naive.
All right, guys. That was just gorgeous. Hope you liked my takedown. I mean, look, I could go on and on about this, but I think I just needed to get some of this off my chest. And let me know in the comments below what you think. Maybe you can go to the discussion between Millennial, Woes, and V and have a listen to it. I think more people should make takedown videos of this kind of, cucked nonsense. I think V needs to this is similar to the whole skeptic debacle, right? I think we really need to push against these kind of unsophisticated, unrealistic ideas, right? So that's kind of why I made this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and